Somewhere, in the middle of the most destructive war in human history, scientists put on lab coats. They had subjects. They had facilities. They had funding from their governments. And they had absolutely no limits. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It isn't a horror movie. Every single experiment in this video was carried out on real human beings, prisoners, civilians, children, who had no choice. These are the most evil experiments of World War II. Warning: this video contains descriptions of extreme human suffering. Viewer discretion is advised. But these stories must be told, because the world promised, never again. Chapter 1, Historical Context. How did we get here? To understand how human beings could do this to one another, we need to understand the world of 1939 to 1945. World War II wasn't just a military conflict. It was a war of ideologies. In Nazi Germany, the state had embraced a pseudo-scientific theory of racial hierarchy, the idea that some human beings were, by nature, superior to others, and that others were, quite literally, less than human. In Imperial Japan, a similar logic applied to conquered peoples. Prisoners of war. Civilians from occupied China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. They were seen not as people, but as resources. And resources, in war, get used. Both regimes created programs, secret, government-funded programs, where doctors and scientists were given something no ethical scientist should ever have: unlimited human test subjects, with no legal consequences. The results were some of the most horrifying chapters in the history of medicine. What makes this especially chilling is that many of these doctors weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They had degrees from respected universities. They published papers. Some had families. They believed, genuinely believed, that what they were doing served a greater scientific good. That self-deception is perhaps the most terrifying part of this entire story. Let's begin. Chapter 3, Unit 731. Japan's Secret Biowarfare Program. In the outskirts of Harbin, in Japanese-occupied Manchuria, there was a facility unlike anything else on Earth. It was disguised as a water purification plant. It had its own railway line, its own airstrip, its own prison. It housed thousands of scientists, doctors, and support staff. And deep within its walls, human beings were referred to not by their names, but by the Japanese word maryuta. It means, logs of wood. This was Unit 731, the Imperial Japanese Army's covert biological and chemical warfare research unit, operating from 1935 to 1945 under the command of General Shiro Ishii. Its official purpose: to advance Japanese military science. Its actual purpose: to use human beings as laboratory animals for experiments too horrific to be conducted anywhere in the civilized world. At its peak, Unit 731 employed over 3,000 personnel and processed an estimated 3,000 to 12,000 prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians and POWs, along with Koreans, Mongolians, Russians, and others. None of them were ever meant to leave. So what exactly happened inside Unit 731? Prisoners were infected with diseases, deliberately, and without their knowledge or consent. Plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, smallpox, dysentery. The scientists wanted to study how each disease progressed in a living human body, and they wanted to test ways to weaponize those diseases for battlefield use. When a subject died, they were dissected, sometimes while still alive, so researchers could examine how the disease had affected their organs in real time. Anesthesia was often withheld. The scientists believed it might interfere with the results, but biological warfare was just the beginning. Unit 731 also conducted what they called surgical and physiological experiments. Prisoners were subjected to operations without anesthesia, not because anesthesia wasn't available, but because the doctors wanted to observe how the body responded to pain and trauma in its natural state. Limbs were amputated and reattached to the opposite side of the body. Parts of organs were surgically removed while subjects were conscious. Blood was replaced with animal blood. Gas gangrene was induced in healthy tissue. Subjects were subjected to pressure chambers until their eyes exploded. They were frozen alive to study frostbite. Perhaps most disturbingly, Unit 731 wasn't just a research facility. It was a weapons testing program. Ishii and his team developed plague bombs, fragile ceramic shells filled with infected fleas, designed to be dropped over enemy cities. Chinese cities were targeted with these biological weapons during the war, killing thousands of civilians. And here is where the story takes its second darkest turn. After Japan's surrender in 1945, General Ishii and the key members of Unit 731 were never prosecuted. The United States government made a secret deal. In exchange for all of Unit 731's research data, the scientists would be granted immunity from war crimes prosecution. The Cold War was beginning. America wanted that data. And so the men responsible for the deaths of thousands walked free. Chapter 4: Nazi Freezing and Altitude Experiments. Luftwaffe experiments at Dachau. Now let's turn to Nazi Germany, where the SS and the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, commissioned their own series of experiments. These were framed, at the time, as military necessity. The altitude experiments began in 1942 under Dr. Sigmund Rascher. A low-pressure chamber, simulating the atmospheric conditions at extreme altitude, was constructed inside Dachau. Prisoners were placed inside and the pressure was reduced, simulating altitudes up to 68,000 feet. That's nearly 13 miles above the Earth's surface. At those altitudes, the human body has no defense. Blood literally boils. Lungs collapse. The brain swells. Rascher and his colleagues observed and documented, sometimes performing live vivisections while the pressure was still applied. More than 70 subjects are believed to have died in these experiments. The freezing experiments, also carried out at Dachau, were arguably even more prolonged in their cruelty. The Nazis needed to know how long a Luftwaffe pilot could survive in the freezing waters of the North Sea if shot down. Prisoners were stripped naked and immersed in tanks of ice-cold water, sometimes for hours, while their core body temperature was meticulously recorded. Many died. Rewarming techniques included being placed next to hot radiators, being wrapped in blankets, and, in one particularly depraved series personally attended by Heinrich Himmler, being placed between the bodies of women prisoners, to test whether animal warmth could revive a hypothermic body. The women were concentration camp inmates. They were not volunteers. These experiments produced real data that, controversially, some researchers have argued should or should not be used by modern medicine. It's a debate that continues today. Can knowledge gained through evil ever be used for good? There is no easy answer. Chapter 5, Dr. Joseph Mengele. The Angel of Death. Of all the names connected to Nazi medical crimes, one stands above the rest in infamy. Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was born in 1911, the son of a factory owner in Bavaria. He earned 2 doctorates, one in anthropology, one in medicine. He was charming, cultured, multilingual. He loved music and was reportedly kind to children. And at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest and deadliest of the Nazi death camps, he became known as the Angel of Death. Mengele arrived at Auschwitz in May 1943. He served as one of the camp's chief physicians, which gave him a role that remains one of the most chilling in human history. He stood on the selection platform at the arrival ramp, greeting incoming trains of prisoners, and with a flick of his hand, left or right, determined who would live, who would go to the gas chambers, and who would become his research subjects. He reportedly whistled opera to himself as he made these selections. Mengele had a particular obsession: twins. He believed that by studying identical twins, he could unlock the secrets of heredity and prove the theories of racial science that underpin Nazi ideology. When a train arrived carrying twins, Mengele would personally run down the platform, calling out, "Zwilling! Zwilling! Twins! Twins!" pulling children from their parents' arms with a smile. For many of those children, Mengele was kind, at first. He gave them extra food. He called them by their names. Some called him Uncle Mengele. And then the experiments began. Twins were subjected to simultaneous operations, performed without anesthesia, so Mengele could compare the physiological reactions of 2 genetically identical people in real time. Eyes were injected with dyes to see if eye color could be altered, a process that caused blinding and agony. Children were infected with diseases and then killed so their organs could be compared with those of their healthy twin. In some documented cases, Mengele sewed twins together, connecting their bloodstreams or organs. The subjects died slowly, of infection, over days. It is estimated that Mengele personally selected hundreds of thousands of people for the gas chambers, and subjected approximately 1,500 sets of twins to his experiments. Only around 200 pairs survived. After the war, Mengele fled to South America with the help of a Rattlin, a network used by Nazi war criminals. He lived under assumed names for decades, never caught, never tried, never facing justice. In 1979, Joseph Mengele suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned near São Paulo, Brazil. He was 67 years old. His death was confirmed only years later through forensic and DNA analysis. Hundreds of his victims outlived him. And they carried their stories to the world. Chapter 6, Infectious Disease Experiments. Ravensbrück and beyond. At Ravensbrück, the largest camp for women, a series of experiments were conducted on female prisoners, largely Polish political prisoners who came to be known as the Ravensbrück rabbits. Nazi surgeons deliberately inflicted wounds on the legs of these women, deep incisions to the bone, and then contaminated those wounds with bacteria, shrapnel, and dirt. The goal was to study the effectiveness of sulfonamide drugs, early antibiotics, in treating battlefield wound infections. Some women died. Many were left permanently disabled. Others were killed after the experiments so they could not bear witness. At other camps, prisoners were deliberately infected with malaria, tuberculosis, typhus, yellow fever, and hepatitis. Vaccines were tested, not for the benefit of the subjects, but to find cheap, efficient ways to protect German soldiers. Records were kept. Reports were filed. Results were published in German medical journals, papers that cited volunteer subjects when no volunteers existed. The scientific community in Germany, with a few notable exceptions, largely stayed silent. Chapter 7, Surgical, Bone and Nerve Experiments. The destruction of the body. At Ravensbrück and Dachau, doctors surgically removed bones, muscles, and nerves from living prisoners, without anesthesia, or with wholly inadequate anesthesia, in order to study regeneration. They wanted to know, how quickly does bone regrow? Can a nerve reconnect itself? These were genuine medical questions. Questions that, in an ethical world, would be answered through animal studies and voluntary human trials over many years. In the camps, they were answered in weeks, on prisoners who woke up to find parts of their own skeleton missing. There were also experiments conducted for the benefit of Nazi racial ideology. Forced sterilization experiments were performed on Jewish and Roma women and men, often through radiation or chemical injection, in a project aimed at developing mass sterilization techniques. Karl Klauberg, an SS physician, claimed he had developed a method to sterilize 1,000 women per day using a single doctor and 10 assistants. The scale of what was planned, and partially executed, is almost beyond comprehension. Chapter 8, The Nuremberg Doctors' Trial. Justice, partial and incomplete. Between December 1946 and August 1947, the Nuremberg Doctors' Trial took place, officially known as United States of America versus Karl Brandt et al. 23 defendants stood in the dock, all German physicians and scientists who had either conducted or overseen the experiments described in this video. The prosecution's case was devastating. Survivor testimony was read aloud in court. Photographs were shown. The defendants' own meticulous records were used as evidence against them. The defense argued that the experiments were not fundamentally different from medical research conducted in other countries, including the United States. They pointed to American experiments on prisoners and mental patients. It was a morally complicated argument that contained more truth than anyone was comfortable admitting. But it was not enough. 16 of the 23 defendants were found guilty. 7 were sentenced to death and executed by hanging on June 2, 1948. Among those executed, Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician. Victor Brack, who oversaw the mass sterilization programs. And of course, Mengele, Ishii, and countless others faced no trial at all. But the Nuremberg Doctors' Trial produced something that would change medicine forever, the Nuremberg Code, a set of 10 principles for ethical medical research that established, for the first time, that voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The Nuremberg Code became the foundation for every medical ethics framework that followed, including the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, and the institutional review board systems that govern research to this day. The evil of these experiments gave the world one of its most important moral advances. Chapter 9, Legacy and why this matters. Memory as moral duty. It's tempting to look at what happened in Unit 731, in Auschwitz, in Dachau and Ravensbrück, and to file it away as the work of monsters. Of a different time. Of people fundamentally unlike us. That would be a comforting conclusion. And it would be wrong. The people who conducted these experiments were educated. They were credentialed. Many were respected members of their communities. What they lacked, what their societies had systematically stripped away, was the recognition that their subjects were fully human. Dehumanization isn't a sudden event. It's a gradual process. It requires propaganda. It requires institutional support. It requires the silence of bystanders who decide that what they're witnessing isn't their problem. The survivors of these experiments, the Ravensbrück rabbits, the twins of Mengel's ward, the former prisoners of Unit 731, spent their lives insisting that what happened to them be remembered. Many testified at Nuremberg. Many traveled the world to speak at schools and universities. Many wrote memoirs. They did this because they understood something essential: the alternative to memory is repetition. Today, the principles born from Nuremberg, informed consent, ethical review, the absolute prohibition on non-consensual experimentation, are global standards. They are imperfect. They are sometimes violated, as history since 1945 has shown. But they exist. They have teeth. And they were written in the blood of the victims of World War II. We remember these experiments not to honor the scientists who committed them. We remember them to honor those who survived. And to honor those who didn't. If this video moved you, if it taught you something, if it made you feel the weight of history, I ask you to do one thing. Share it. These stories deserve to be heard. The survivors deserved witnesses. The least we can do, decades later, is make sure their experiences are not forgotten. If you want to go deeper, I'll link below to books, documentaries, and reputable historical sources where you can learn more. Leave a comment telling me which part of this history you find most important to remember. And if you're new here, subscribe. We make videos about the history that shaped the world we live in today. Take care of yourselves. And never forget WW2 Warzone channel.